Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome some old friends and near friends back to the Peterson Institute for International Economics. My name is Adam Posen, and I'm the president of the Institute. We are here today for a symposium on encouraging a manufacturing renaissance through transatlantic trade and investment. It's our pleasure to be hosting many members and leaders of the Italian business community here with us today, as well as Vice Minister Calenda, who we've been working with increasingly in recent months, and our friends from the Italian embassy, including Ambassador Bisignano, who we talk to quite frequently. We have been trying, particularly our colleague Jeff Schott, but others here, have been trying to put additional meat on the TTIP discussion in Washington. And so it's our great pleasure to cooperate with Business Europe, with Confindustria, and other leading business groups to put that meat out there. It's not quite a Florentine steak yet, but we'll get there. We all are aware, watching what's gone on with TPA in the U.S., that the U.S. is, let's not say the U.S., let us say the U.S. Congress needs to be persuaded of the virtues, which are evident to most of us, but somehow elude them, of deeper trade integration. And a number of us in this institute have very strong hopes, in part based on the work of Jeff and Kathleen Semino and Gary Huffbauer and others, Nicolas Veron, have very strong hopes that this is the deal that, if you'll excuse the expression, my Italian friends, the Congress cannot refuse. That this is the deal that would be at high standards with people like us who have at least as good labor and environmental protections as us, and who can come together on things like standards, but also where we are finally setting the model for 21st century business and trade liberalization. Please forgive me. Business and trade liberalization, where it's not just about reducing tariffs, which we obviously have done enormously in the transatlantic context, but about investment, about rules, about behind-the-border issues. Now, again, as people in this room have written, we don't want to make light of the places where the U.S. and European representatives or the American and U.S. business communities have differences, obviously in GMOs, and agriculture, and other issues of chlorine in chicken and things I never thought I'd have to learn about, but now do. Obviously issues of safety and products and chemicals and various technological developments, on intellectual property having to do with films from certain countries who are not represented here today. I don't want to overstate it. We're aware of these serious issues, but we also see the huge potential. And we see the huge potential in terms of the deepening of the transatlantic marketplace. We see the huge potential in terms of the simplification and universalization of standards that matter, particularly in high-tech and heavy manufacturing industries. We see the implications for the world, both in trade terms and economic terms, if the US and the EU are standing together, which is a vision that I know the Vice Minister shares quite strongly, and we'll ask him to give some remarks on that in a moment. So even though we don't generally favor manufacturing versus agriculture versus services versus whatever, we're economists, so we're free traders in our blood, we do view that the progress that can be made transatlantic will show up in manufacturing, where there is so much high-quality employment and high-quality investment, will show up and reinforce the kinds of both political arguments and economic benefits that we hope to see. And so it's in that spirit we've gathered today. We're going to have a series from now till roughly 12:15 of overview remarks, which I think are going to help us set the guideposts, but they're more than appetizers, they're quite meaty. Starting with Vice Minister Carlo Calenda, then followed by Emma Marsagaglia, forgive me for my butchering the pronunciation, President of Business Europe, and by our own Jeffrey Schott, Senior Fellow here at the Peterson Institute, who is leading our efforts on transatlantic trade. We'll have a brief networking lunch. People are welcome to go outside and do terrible things like smoke or drink in that period, and reconvene for a panel discussion with leadoff remarks by our senior fellow Carolyn Freund, who has been doing a great deal of work looking at firm-level competitiveness as opposed to competitiveness of nations, which is in keeping with the new trade theory and trade practice, and which has important implications for U.S. National Export Initiative and so on. We'll also have Daniel Kraus, the Vice Director General of Confindustria. We have already with us Marjorie Chorlins, Vice President for Europe from the U.S. Chamber, with whom we work on a number of issues, and Shane Carr from the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, which I want to remind people is not just the big three. It's European, Japanese, Korean, and American headquartered producers. It's the alliance of those who produce in the U.S., and I think it'll be an interesting perspective. Anyway, thank you all very much for joining us. I hope the Vice Minister will forgive me, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to say he's someone of serious economic sense and political heft who we enjoy working with, and leave the introduction at that. Mr. Vice Minister.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say this is not a Florentine steak, is much more an hormone steak, in the sense that we need a lot of hormone to bring the TTIP to an end. We are here with a delegation of Italian companies. I would say the most important Italian industrial associations are with us. And what was very interesting for me was to see how close they are with their counterpart in US. We do think when we negotiate as a government that we need to defend the business community, our businessmen, more than what they think they should be defended. I mean, they know that profits and growth is coming from free trade. And yesterday we had a lot of meetings with industrial association here in the US with the counterpart from Italy and from Europe. And in many sectors, we are already very much close in terms of what we want in terms of rules, in terms of tariff, and so on and so forth. So I think that today for us is a very important event, not only to discuss the contents of TTIP, but also to reflect on how we can make the TTIP make progress in the near future. We are glad to be here today in this great institution. Economic freedom is nurtured by research and analysis that strengthen our choices. In turn, economic growth goes hand in hand with democracy and liberalism. An important lesson to remember: not only democracy feeds economic prosperity through the range of freedoms it protects, but economic prosperity is crucial to supporting democracy. I come from a country whose economy has greatly suffered in the last 20 years, resulting in the lack of growth. Believe me, during this period, our democracy has suffered too, as a consequence of reduced resources for our schools, for our university, more generally for those institutions that support our values. This is why economic growth is a political imperative, not for greed, not for power, but to nurture our societies, to empower the freedom we all cherish. We are thankful to the Peterson Institute and its president, Dr. Posen, agreed to follow a common reflection path with us. I'm persuaded that these times of change, we need to think through our economic policy choices. We need to examine opportunities and consequences, in particular when international political economy is at stake, for its lasting effect. As I said earlier, the Italian economy has suffered from stagnation in the last 20 years. That is, even before the international financial crisis hit our economic systems. Some argue that this stagnation is to be blamed on globalization. In fact, processes of international integration make the perfect scapegoat in our times. Increased pressures on our welfare state systems, which were forced to retrench, combined with ever-growing international competition, has been and currently is feeding warring populism, both in Europe and on the other side of the Atlantic. For the coming European election, I expect that in many countries, and most likely in Italy, France, and UK, the number of people who will choose not to vote, plus the number of people who will choose anti-European populist party, will exceed half of the population. These are signs of an illness of our democracies with deep economic roots in the sluggish growth, in the sense of disenfranchised from a global economy, whose benefits are too often hard to grasp for the layman as well for the small and medium firm, for the family business that suffer, for the family savings that get thinner day by day. I think these are the real issues we are facing, issues that can mark an historic conjuncture. What I mean is that the way we will address and respond or not respond to such issues will mark the next phase of our democracies. My persuasion is that we need to offer a bold answer. My persuasion is that a deep and ambitious TTIP treaty is our best chance to set a new phase of the international economic order, where both the values of democracy and increasingly open economy can be supported. Let me take a step back and try and offer a wider perspective. A negative reaction to globalization is often more understandable than what we like to think. From a national, subnational, and local viewpoint, a positive narrative is all too hard to find. More effort can be used to explain, and we have to do a better job in detailing our choices. However, we must now pursue choices that can feed a positive narrative based on positive facts. I think that we should and talk about globalization as a great long-term project carried out by the advanced industrial countries, which by and large overlap with the two sides of the Atlantic. The first phase of the project can be likened to a large investment. Through open trade, we supported the inclusion in the world economy of low-income countries. Our support was both in cash and kind, so to speak. New economic protagonists conquered a large share of our markets. Now that many countries have entered the global economic network, it is time to look back at our original investment and seek for dividends, keeping in mind three great dangers we face. First, we might think that the values of liberalism have prevailed, yet the end of history seems not in sight. We need to keep up our vigilance on the core values of our societies. Second, we must prevent and countervail the protectionist pushes that are visible in a good number of emerging countries. We all know that non-tariff barriers are mushrooming at a rate of thousands per year. It is the understandable yet unacceptable temptation by countries that have gone through their first industrialization phase, so to speak. Third, we need to set our international political economy to serve the quest for higher growth rates at home, both in US and Europe. In order to increase our chances of achieving this aim, we need a deep and ambitious TTIP to be reached as soon as possible. This conviction is not moved by rhetoric, although we all know that rhetoric is also important. Let me take advantage of being hosted by a research center of excellence, and let me show a piece of research data as an example. I'm comparing data from US and data from the strongest representative of manufacturing economy in the EU, Germany. Chancellor Merkel will be happy. Indeed, this can be considered exemplary of a broader comparison with manufacturing-based continental EU economies. The figure compares the US and Germany with regards of their respective ability to innovate. We are here talking about two absolute world stars when innovation volumes are concerned. Despite the sheer quantity of patents that US and Germany file in each given year, their relative innovation advantage, that is, the sector in which they excel, relative to the other country, it is remarkably different and complementary. The US are world leaders in innovation in computer technology, medical technology, pharmaceutical, digital technology. More generally, those sectors in which innovation occurs in radical leaps. The manufacturing-based EU economy excel in innovation on the job or incremental innovation, which characterize sectors such as transport, mechanical elements, engines, electrical machinery, and so on. This graph is focused on patent data rather than trade in order to measure specialization, because patents are not influenced by relative prices and other relatively volatile variables, but show the purest future of our economies. They show our respective institutional cultural capacity to innovate and grow. These data say many things, and we will discuss for a long time their implication. I wish, however, to focus on two aspects in particular. First, our economies are incredibly complementary. We have different abilities, possesses different specialization that feed and reinforce one another. Hence, a deeper integration of these two economies does not simply increase competition, it increases the ability of scaling up our relative strengths. The second, these data tell us, if you look at the increasing differentials between the mid-80s and the mid-2000s, is that our relative specialization in innovation increased over time. In other words, as globalization proceeds, countries do not lose their characteristics. Quite the contrary, each country becomes even more recognizable. In a way, the more our respective economies know one another, the more they get to know themselves, the better they get at doing what they are good at. Now, take this data as a background and add to them two economic blocks that make up nearly half of the global GDP, only two main currencies to deal with, close to 1 billion relatively wealthy and educated people, 33% of world trade in goods, and 42% of world trade in services. If we can bring this much under one single regulatory umbrella for trade and investment, we will have given a new governance center to the global economy, with political, economic, and cultural consequences that will spill over well beyond our borders. It is relatively straightforward to foresee three main consequences to this positive scenario. First, with such a powerful center of economic gravity, current protectionist tendencies will be dramatically weakened. Try and remember Bali. Up until September 2013, the WTO package seemed a mirage to everyone. Eventually, however, the deal occurred and multilateralism remained a solid framework of dialogue and concrete, albeit slow progress. That success was made possible by the decoupling of emerging powers, with China playing a key role to push toward an agreement. In turn, such a decoupling was made possible by the determination and leadership of both US and EU, who made clear that the end of WTO would have not meant the end of an increasingly free trade environment. We made clear that FTAs would have proceeded no matter what happened in Bali, and when the risk of being sidelined materialized, most emerging countries pushed for a successful deal. A strong and determined Atlantic bloc can thus act as a catalyst for further integration and openness, and therefore preventing protectionist tendencies. The second outcome of a wide and ambitious TTIP would have to do, plain and simple, with the positive effects of our economy. Let's set aside for a moment the unanimous impact studies forecasting increased trade and incomes. Those studies certainly underestimate the dynamic effect that such a deal will bring about. Investing in the EU or US will be immediately more profitable than is now. Reducing regulatory barriers will open up opportunities for all sorts of new ventures, for startups in high tech and for small and medium enterprises in traditional manufacturing sectors. It will create further two returns of skills, political stability, rule of law. It will push SMEs and large firms to expand their activities. A wide and ambitious TTIP will not increase races to the bottom, quite the opposite. It would stimulate upscaling. It would push standards to a higher level. Third, and perhaps even more importantly, a large democratic and stable bloc acting as a centripetal force towards economic openness will discourage authoritarianism on its border and beyond. And to be straightforward, I think that the best answer to the new Russian aggressive attitude is to conclude very soon the TTIP. In short, I mentioned already, a deep and ambitious TTIP will bring back the governance of globalization there where it started, in the cradle of liberal and democratic political economies. In the second half of 2014, Italy will hold the EU presidency. We will continue to push with even more vigor for a comprehensive and effective negotiations. The next few months will mark an important political transition in Europe. A new parliament and a new commission will take office. We will need to gain increased momentum for the long-term project of restoring the centrality of the Atlantic bloc. Now, I do think that TTIP is not a simple piece of incremental trade. It's not the same like other free trade agreements we are negotiating. Our economies are already integrated and we share deep cultural and political traits. We must consider the TTIP as the project that brings integration to a new level. It's not about free trade agreement, it's about integration of two large economies. Hence, we should not consider it as an endeavor with a beginning and a end. It's not a one-shot deal. I don't think we should consider the TTIP as a deal that will have a conclusion. I think will be a work in progress. Instead, we should consider it as a living agreement. I came here in US with a high representatives of Italian industries, and we engaged in an intense dialogue with representatives from the US industries. During our frank conversation, as I mentioned before, we have witnessed a very high degree of alignment between the two business communities. In many sectors, certainly on tariff and on a number of market access topics, we are extremely close. I mean, our business communities are close and can help us reaching very soon an ambitious agreement on many issues. On other issues, more discussion will be needed. I think that on certain topics, cultural reasons more than opposite economic interests require longer negotiation before an agreement can be reached. Other issues, such as energy or audiovisual services, are currently out of the table, but they should be, at a certain point, put back on the table and addressed. This is why the TTIP should stay as a living agreement, with the ambition of an ever wider and deeper economic integration. At the same time, we should also aim at reachable, tangible results as soon as bundles of agreed topics can be identified, with a swift implementation. This first step will keep momentum high, will deliver immediate benefits for our economies, and will push back any doubt on that the relationship between America and Europe will be the strong protagonist of the new phase of the globalization we are entering in. There is a good example we can follow if we look at the TTIP as an integration agreement more than a free trade agreement, and is the Pacific Alliance one. Whenever we are able to deliver something, we should deliver that piece and implement that piece and then move on. And over the next years, I think we will experience more and more issues we want to share and we want to agree on. And given the geopolitical situation, this process can be quite fast, more than what we think today. The choices we will be making in the next 2 years will be the key to our next 20 years. Let's make the right one. Thank you very much.
Even though I thought I'd gotten to know the Vice Minister, that was terrific. Really linking together things in the big picture along with the real economics of it. And I love the formulation, which I see at my local cheese store as well as in industrial trade, that globalization is about making each of us more like ourselves over time. We will give our arriving guest a chance to catch her breath and call upon Jeffrey Schott, Senior Fellow at the Institute, who's been here quite some time and has been a key advisor to the U.S. State Department, to the WTO, to USTR, and to various governments through the years, to give us his take on the big picture of TTIP.
Hopefully we'll. No. We're going to need some technical assistance here. I'm too old to provide it. Well, it's a great pleasure for me to follow Vice Minister Calenda, and very refreshing to have an official presentation that is so substantive and so insightful. And so complementary to all of the things that I wanted to say that I can be very brief because we are in substantial agreement. What I'd like to do is just lay out a few reasons, a few comments on what to expect from the TTIP and why we should be able to move forward in the manner that Vice Minister Calenda suggested. The TTIP was founded on the thoughtful deliberations and recommendations of the high-level working group on jobs and growth that spent about 15 months preparing very carefully a detailed agenda for the bilateral negotiations. It wasn't an accident that the group was called bilateral, the high-level group on jobs and growth, because the focus was on bolstering economic growth and employment in both the United States and Europe. That, I think, really needs to be the focus. Thinking about the themes of innovation that the Vice Minister talked about and how we boost productivity in our economy to encourage more investment, which will lead to greater employment. We already have the world's largest commercial relationship, about $1 trillion in annual trade in goods and services, almost $4 trillion invested in each other's market. So it's already a very rich and complex economic relationship. So what more can the TTIP do? Well, there's a lot more that can be done. There are still some important restrictions in place that dampen or discourage trade and investment. There are tariff peaks, there are services restrictions, there are discrimination in government procurement, there are differences in health and product safety standards that can impose redundant compliance costs. And so the TTIP is designed to try to eliminate these tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade, very ambitiously try to coordinate or harmonize regulatory policies affecting trade in goods and services. And I say services, even though the focus of our discussions today are on boosting manufacturing. Part of the process of boosting manufacturing is improving the provision and opportunity and ability to use advanced services for logistics, for marketing, for production, and so it is an important part of the equation, and one where there can be substantial benefits for manufacturing firms because there is still a lot of restrictions and additional costs imposed by service regulatory policies. And then the final objective, the last point, is very consistent with what the Vice Minister said. The new provisions on services, on disciplines on state-owned enterprises, environment, labor, competition policy, these are all could set important precedent standards not only for the transatlantic region, but for the global economy and for future WTO negotiations. Here I, just for your edification, put forward some Statistics on our trade, the growth, which has been not as fast as it could be in both goods and services, but you can see that services are an important component of our bilateral trade. But more importantly, if you look at the direct investment in each other's economy, that's significant. We are the major investors in each other's markets. And manufacturing is very important in the U.S. economy, European investment in U.S. manufacturing. It accounts for about 37% of total European foreign direct investment in the U.S. market. And so there is a common interest. This is not us against them. This is working together because we are in both markets, and we have a common interest in boosting economic growth in both markets. Now, removing border restrictions and unnecessary regulatory measures that often significantly inflate costs should help boost the productivity of firms and workers on each side of the Atlantic. And the savings from lower tariffs and from eliminating redundant regulatory compliance costs should be substantial in terms of increased transatlantic trade and investment and greater U.S. and European competitiveness vis-a-vis foreign firms both in domestic and overseas export markets. That's another element of how we improve our competitiveness. We get stronger ourselves, and then, therefore, we can do better both at home and in third country export markets. What's the potential payoff? There are several major studies that have been done to date, mostly by European researchers. Estimates vary significantly owing in large measure to differing underlying assumptions about what can be achieved in the pact. And while we can reasonably assume that almost all tariffs will be phased out, the handling of behind the border barriers, often embedded in domestic regulatory policy, is much more difficult to predict. What can be done in terms of aligning or coordinating domestic regulatory policies, and how does one assess and quantify the prospective economic impact? Well, I think the studies that have been done to date are of varying quality. The ones done by the European Center for Economic Policy and Research, I think are the most comprehensive. They showed potential GDP gains of about 0.4 to 0.5% of GDP for both the United States and the European Union from tariff elimination and the removal of about half of the non-tariff measures, including government procurement rules, that they classify as actionable. So they're not saying we're going to eliminate all regulation. That is fanciful. A lot of regulation is important and serves very significant and crucial social and economic policy objectives. But there is a lot that's redundant, and there's a lot that are unnecessary, and that could boost those gains. Global EU and U.S. exports would increase by 6 to 8%, and this is not bad for government work, and not bad when one considers that these models, based on the way they're constructed, have often been shown to underestimate the actual growth in output and trade that occurs once the agreement enters into force. Now, these gains are significant, but depend importantly on the willingness of U.S. and EU officials to modify existing domestic policies. We are not going to get the improvements necessary by saying Brussels has to change and Washington can just keep our policies intact, and vice versa. There are areas where we are going to need to change, in some areas where we can align, in some areas where we can improve. And there's the rub and a key challenge for TTIP negotiators. The novel element of the TTIP is the emphasis on regulatory policies, but there is strong opposition from independent regulatory authorities, and both for often for political reasons, for jurisdictional reasons. And this is particularly true in the financial services area. There was unfortunately a flare-up of rhetoric at the start of the negotiations that led both sides to make rather extreme statements. In fact, if you look at U.S. Trade agreements, they all include provisions on financial regulations and regulatory policies. They include important exceptions for prudential measures, and those types of exceptions can be looked at carefully. But there is room to deal with financial services in both the market access and regulatory capacity to some extent, and complement the ongoing work that the U.S. and the European Union are doing elsewhere. And I think as we've been going forward, and Simon & Johnson and I wrote a policy brief for the Institute on this, it led to a rebuttal or a reply from the European Commission, which began to moderate the rhetoric and began to bring the dialogue of the negotiators closer together in this important area. And so I'm confident that we will see some progress on financial services. We also have the opportunity to do more on tariffs. Though in the agricultural sector, one will have to look at other aspects of domestic support for the agricultural sector, because those policies work hand in glove. And so cutting the tariffs on agriculture, which is important, will also need some look at the broader support for agriculture. There's room also to do more on public procurement. And again, this is where we will face some political obstacles. But these obstacles, whether it be on procurement, whether it be discussion of investment and investor-state dispute settlement, whether it's the politically sensitive issue of data and privacy, these are all areas where the overall support for working together should, over time, allow us to find some appropriate solution. It should not stall the negotiations. And what Vice Minister Kalina mentioned, I think, is very important. There is a value in early implementation of areas where we can build and grow our relationship, both for economic reasons and for strategic reasons. The crisis in the Ukraine provides a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate the support and the unity of the United States and the European Union in working together. There seems to be strains on what we could do with regard to sanctions policy vis-a-vis Russia because of Europe's much deeper dependence on the Russian market for trade and investment. But a TTIP working together both in energy and on trade, early implementation of some of the trade aspects, could show that we have a broader interest in working together, and we will continue to do so. I think that can have important geostrategic advantages as well. And so I've exceeded my time, Mr. Chairman. You've been very generous with me. I hope our following speaker, who everyone has come to listen to, has now caught her breath, and we look forward to her remarks. Thank you very much.
Jeff is still traumatized. Yesterday we had our board of directors meeting, and he was forced to be a little tighter with this group. We can expand a bit and enjoy the common knowledge in the room. It is my pleasure to invite our third speaker in a moment, Ms. Emma Marcelli, again, forgive the pronunciation, President of Business Europe. She comes to us as one of those brand name exports from Italy of Bocconi, and those of us in the economics business know that as a very good mark of training. Also having experienced MBA at NYU, went on with the family business and other businesses, was previously president, as most of the people in this room don't need to know, of Confindustria. She was both the youngest and the first female president of Confindustria from Italy, which is an achievement. I spell all this out in part because we are podcasting live to the world, and all this will be, including, I hope, the minister's very exceptional remarks, the text will be up on our website from after this conference. And of course, now Emma is president of Business Europe, which represents the competitiveness concerns and positive agenda of companies from 35 countries. We've had an official, we've had a scholar, and now a business person to give us a view on where and what we should be doing with TTIP. Emma, please.
First of all, I congratulate with you because you pronounce my surname very well. Sometimes the Italians made it worse, so thank you for that. No, I'm very happy to be here. First of all, apologize for being late, but today and yesterday and tomorrow, as it always happens when you have this kind of travel, we have a very busy agenda with some late, so I really apologize with Minister Calenda for being late and not have the chance to listen to him, but I'm sure what I'm going to say will be very similar, very close to what he said, because we already saw that we really agree on a lot of things on TTIP and industrial competitiveness. So it's my pleasure to be here. When we talk about TTIP and when we talk about manufacturing renaissance, we are talking about one of the two main issues for Business Europe. Thanks also for what you said. Business Europe represents 41 national associations throughout 35 countries in Europe. So we already make another enlargement of Europe. And we are really I think, the strong voice for defending competitiveness and the reason and what the companies want towards the Commission, towards the European Parliament, and towards also, of course, the national government. We work a lot also throughout our national members. So the Transatlantic TTIP, we are here, and we are here with a strong delegation, as Confindustria has done, of more than 30 persons coming from all over Europe. And we are here to say very clearly that we consider the TTIP really one of our main mission. We think there are a lot of potential of growth and jobs in the TTIP. Some data have been showed. I can show some other data, but the political aspect is very clear for us in a moment in which, for sure, Europe, but in some extent also US, but for sure Europe needs growth and need new jobs. It's true that maybe the worst part of the recession is gone. We are, for example, as Business Europe, our projection for 2014 is a growth of 1.6% for Europe. So situation is getting a little bit better, but in our opinion, this kind of growth is still fragile. It is not enough to create new jobs and to solve this problem of unemployment and mainly of youth unemployment. So we think that TTIP could be a very powerful instrument to really create jobs and have new enhanced growth without new public spending, because this is not the way we like to see new jobs and new growth. This is also a way to say that we believe very strongly in free trade. We believe very strongly in the role that companies could play, both both the Atlantic part. So we really think this is a very interesting and strong objective on which we want to work for our side, but with all the allies possible. As you already said, the transatlantic economy already generates $5 trillion in total sales per year. So we are by far the wealthiest and the biggest economy in the world together. This is twice as much as is generated by American and Asian transnational corporations put together. And additionally, it employs up to 15 million workers in the EU and the US. So we're already a very important economy and a very important situation together. The US and the Europe are by far each other's primary source and destination for foreign direct investment. This has already been said, but we know this, and I want to underline this. The EU represents a more important destination for US foreign direct investment than the other way around. In 2011, Europe has attracted more than 50% of US global foreign direct investment, while the US received 17 of EU FDI. Trade ties is also very important already. The EU is the destination of 17 of US exports, making it the second most important trade partner behind Canada, while the US receives 7% of the EU export, making it the most important partner. And in 2012, the EU ran a surplus in merchandise trade of 87 billion with the US and of 11 billion in services. The potential is so we are already very linked in investments, in trades. We are by far the wealthiest economy in the world together. But as it has already been showed by the person who talked before me, the potential is very big, it's still very big. There are a lot of studies, of independent studies that shows that there is a big potential. There are different data, but we are always talking about 0.3, 0.5, or 1% of GDP growth. We are talking about the possibility to have a raise in export on both sides. So the potential is there. What we need is very clear. So what is our position in what are our comments, and also what I take from these 3 days of meeting with a lot of people here, the U.S. administration, the negotiators, some think tank, very important as where we are here. My impression, our impression is, our feeling and our position is very clear. We are very interested in having a broad agreement. This is very important. So, as it has already been said, tariffs are a part of it, but this is not the most important part. Tariff on average are around 4%. There are some sectors in which are very high and much higher. But this is not the only part we want to see on the table. Of course, we also want to see something on here. But we think that the most interesting part, as it has already been said, is in what we call the regulatory cooperation. You know, this for us is very clear when you still have a situation in which if you are a small, medium enterprise coming from Europe and you want to enter the US market, but you have completely different standard in the EU compared with the US, where you have a problem of technical standard, where you have problem of different regulations. Sometimes this means for a small, medium enterprise the non-possibility to have access to the US market, or to have it at a very high cost in a very long time. So sometimes this means that you don't really have the possibility to enter this market. And there are some projections saying that this regulatory divergence is equal to 10-20% of tariffs overall. So we are talking a very big part. We think this is where there is the big potential. Here we have a different approach from the US part and the EU part. The US part is insisting a lot on what they call horizontal aspect, and mainly transparency. Of course, we are absolutely in line with the fact that we need more transparency, and if the TTIP could help the EU decision processing to be more transparent and less bureaucratic, we are the most happy person in the world. But of course, in our opinion, this must not be the only part, the only subject on which we work, because there are the other part, which in our opinion is the most important part, where the potential is there, is the so-called sectorial part. We would like to see sector by sector the possibility to have a real convergence on on the regularity part. And we already said this very clearly. In these days, there is a big work going on. We have at least 6 sectors where the U.S. association, and the EU association, the business association, are working together to face this regulatory divergence. So there is a work going on, there is a lot of work going on, and we think we should go on with this part and take into consideration very clearly this part. So tariff is important, but it's not enough. Regulatory cooperation is very important, and we really want to see some progress on that. We think that also services and public procurement is very important. We know that when we talk about public procurement all over the world, but also here in the US, this is a difficult argument. But we have also to be very clear and say that if you go beyond the federal level, we see at the national level some existing discriminatory legislation by America or some of the others. So we think we should go on this and have some market access, as Minister Calenda has said also yesterday when we were together. And last but not least, if we think about what's going on in these days, we would like also to have a chapter on energy and raw materials. This is very important. We all think that what's going on in Ukraine shows what Europe does not have to do. We think that we have to have a more independency from Russia for what regards oil and gas. And why not? The TTIP could be the good instruments to have a new sources of import for us of gas, of the shale gas. We know it's difficult. We know there are a lot of technical aspects as well, but we like to see a chapter on this, and we like also to have like a preferential treatment for Europe on this part. And this is the situation. So we are very interested in a broad agreement. To be very honest, I have said this also publicly, and I repeat it here. For what we see now, we don't see a strong commitment from the US administration on the TTIP. We see maybe a stronger commitment on the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Agreement. We understand this because we know that the TPP started before. But we really think that if we look at the situation, the geopolitical situation that goes on, and I heard this from the person who talked before me, and also I think from Mr. Calenda. So if we look at what's going on the geopolitical scenario, we really think that we have all the situation that there is the opportunity to give a real priority to the TTIP. We had yesterday a very interesting meeting also with some people from the Congress. They are the ones who are supporting the TTIP very, very strongly. And they said to us that they believe that also in the Congress, the TTIP could be a little bit more easily accepted than the TPP, because in the TPP, in the Trans-Pacific, there is a lot of problems on losing jobs from the Congress point of view, from the US opinion point of view. So our point is that we would like to see a strong commitment from President Obama, from the US administration on TTIP. We think this is the real moment, the right moment to do it. And we absolutely must see some real progress and content. Otherwise, and I finish, we know very well as Europeans that in Europe there is a lot of talking on TTIP. That is not something that is going on here in the US, but in Europe there is a lot of talking on this. And there is a growing negative opinion about the TTIP, the idea that the TTIP could lower the standard, the social standard, the job standard, and this is growing and growing. Then there are other countries like in Germany where this concern about data protection is very strong. So we see and we feel a growing negative opinion on TTIP. So also for us that are very strongly supporting this, if we don't see real content and real progress, the risk is that in the next weeks also because we are entering in an election period here in Europe, but also the US will do it for the midterm election, the risk is that the negative opinion will prevail, and when the negative opinion prevails, it's very difficult to support and it's very difficult to go on. So, and I finished. We see a lot of potential. We think that through the TTIP, we can also have an enhancing of our competitiveness as European. I talked before about energy. Energy is a very strong issue for competitiveness in Europe. We think that innovation is a strong issue in Europe, and through the TTIP, through a stronger investment attitude together with the US, we can solve this problem. So we really think that here we have all the potential, and we have all the situation also to solve our problems. So we want to go on, and we'll be very committed to really see some real content and some real progress in the next weeks. Thank you.
Emma, can I ask you and Jeff and the Vice Minister to come up here for a few minutes, attach a mic, and be ready to take questions from our distinguished audience? Just to say again, the Peterson Institute is very proud to be not only doing work on these kinds of trade deals and talking with the people behind them and feeling the impact, but that we're very proud to continue our long association with Italian business and Italian interests through the embassy. We have very good relations with the Council on U.S. and Italy. Every year there's a scholar here from there as well as an event, and we view this as part of that whole framework. Now, having filled the time, we hope that our colleagues are mic'd up. Let me turn to our audience. There's a roving mic at front. There's a standing mic at back. If you'd like to ask a question, either line up at the mic or raise your hand. Please identify yourself when you ask a question and try to make it a question, not a speech, or I'll be forced to take action. Who would like to go first? All that in mind? No one. All right. Jeff, do you have a question for the two people sitting to your left?
Well, I think we have heard a call for action, and clearly that is needed and would benefit the United States and the European Union. How would we craft a first part of the bargain that could be implemented early? I mean, we have a lot of issues on the table, but some should be able to be harvested early and immediately benefit U.S. and European business.
Well, I think we should, first of all, not consider to fragment the single undertaking method. This means that we should assess where we are on the three pillars instead of going one pillar to another, and see where we can reach an easy take. I wouldn't say easy, but reachable agreement. And then I would implement this and keep on implementing with incremental steps over a long period of time. I think the easiest thing to do now is to put together the tariff reduction plus market access in some chapters, and those sectors President Marcelli was making reference to, where you already know that the two business community has reached an agreement. And the reason why I'm saying that this is crucial is because we are not making rules for regulators. We're making rules for business community. So if the business community reached an agreement, the agreement is done. What we should do as government is just to, get the feedback from the business association and put into the framework of the agreement. So we have here 6 sectors, a lot of tariff, because we all know that United States is ready to go to up to 100% and more or less Europe the same, and market access in some sectors that are crucial. And we can deliver this. And this will be the most important answer to what is happening in Europe. And we, in Europe, I mean with Russia. And I do think that this is something easy. We can do it in months and not waiting until the end of 2015, where you will have the new presidential election coming, a lot of problems if the primary in the Democratic Party will be more troubled than what is expected now. So I will be very careful about going for the old deal soon, because we will end up by having 2-year or 3-year waiting.
President Marshigaglia,
No, I
anything
totally
else?
agree on what Minister Calenda said. We don't like to slice part because, as I said before, is the broader picture that can really enhance growth and jobs. But we have to think at like intermediate objective that we can reach. And I totally agree with Minister Calenda that what we are waiting now is a new offer for tariffs on goods, on industrial goods and agriculture, and a new offer from both parts, from access to market to public procurement. And as I said before, this part on sectors, which is really going on, and it's a fantastic jobs, could be taken into consideration by the regulator. So I agree with that. Having said that, we want the broader picture, not slides piece, but intermediate objectives to show real progress. And I totally agree with Carlo. This could be done in the next weeks or months. I think it's very important that we don't have this situation in which, and somebody told us here in Washington, until the midterm election in the US, nothing will happen. This will be very bad.
Jeff, just briefly, you do not speak for the administration, but from your sense of where the U.S. is the kind of intermediate target approach our Italian colleagues offering likely to fly around here?
I think people are very politically risk averse, and that's probably a signal that you've been getting from your discussions. And there's already a big challenge for trying to reach the endgame negotiation in the TPP. Of course, moving forward on the TPP could open a lot of doors that would also make it easier to move forward on the TTIP, and would hopefully accelerate the passage of Trade Promotion Authority, which would also benefit TTIP. But none of this is looking at the immediate early harvest or preliminary implementation of reforms that would give an immediate boost to businesses on both sides of the Atlantic. And so I think more needs to be done, and perhaps the impetus of working together to have a joint response in the current crisis in Eastern Europe could lead to more of the considerations for early action in weeks and months, as opposed to looking forward over a year or more.
And if I can add on this point, I do think that now Commission and USTR are concentrated on the big deal to close the deal in the traditional way. And I mean, we should respect this, but they have to make progress, because otherwise we need to find another way through. So I'm not saying, if they are able to put together a roadmap that makes sense, that we are happy with. Let's go to solve all the problems in the world all together and close the deal in 2015. But if we are moving this way, but please think about how crazy it is that you have 2 years of high-level group defining all the problems you have, working on identify the various issues, and then you start the negotiation from scratch, making an offer which is very low because you want to negotiate on what? You already know that you will reach almost 100% of tariff reduction. So it's a game, a theater, which I don't think is useful for Europe and for United States. Either they are able to do the job in the normal way of doing it, or we should, everybody, I mean the business community, the think tank, and the government, we should push to find a different way, a creative way to make this happen soon.
Very good.
Can I say just,
no, actually.
Oh, sorry.
At the back mic, please.
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. My question is about investment and the TTIP, because the front page story the last week in almost all newspapers has been the very large GE proposed acquisition of a French company, which is being opposed by the French government because they want an EU company. Now, the U.S. has blocked some Chinese investments, especially state-owned high tech. But how should this come to TTIP? Should we be able to block each other's investments for the EU, U.S., or what the French are doing?
Well, the TTIP should even make the flow of investment from EU to US and from US to EU even stronger. Even though, as we said, that there is a big history here. So I think that TTIP is really an instrument to not to have situation in which you block investment from the US to the EU. I have to say that for what I understand, I don't know the history from the inside, but from what I understand, the GE Alstom situation is, I mean, I think the board of Alstom said that they want GE. So I mean, I think that there is not a real stop on that. But anyway, TTIP should be also is an instrument to have at least more investment flow from one part of the other to the Atlantic.
Okay, does anyone else want to comment on that? Yeah, Jeff.
No, I wanted to build on that and say a number of these issues, there is an additional player who has taken more prominence in the initiative, and that's the European Parliament. In the Congress, we have many diverse views that often require extensive negotiation to address. The European Parliament and constituencies that they represent are raising questions about investment, about other issues that are requiring additional work in Europe. Now, do you see this as a main constraint on the early action that you would like to see, or how would you try to accommodate that new political reality in Europe with the advancing of a quick, at least partial agreement?
Look, there are two different type of question. One is the issues that are related with cultural peculiarities. Let me make an example. OGM, GMO, okay? Chlorine chicken and whatever it is. Yeah,
You're the ones bringing that up, not me.
I like chlorine chicken, but just it's a question of culture, and we will never succeed to sort out these issues. Now, it will take time. We need to define, for example, what principle will guide us in judging if something is dangerous or not. This will be already something important. There are others, like the ESDS question. Now, I do think, first of all, maybe someone ignored that we have many investment protection agreements already in place. So, in my opinion, there is a discussion which is strange, because already we have an investment protection system. It's very important to upgrade and to have more protection within the treaty. But in principle, we already started with the investment protection on bilateral level. So today, for example, you have a number of companies that are going to I think it's World Bank is the place where the controversial settings is put. But they go to the World Bank in order to raise the disputes. So I don't see the problem. And it is clear that we cannot, through the investment protection, put limits to the democratic power of a state to change the law. But we also have to consider that if the law changed something that affects the business on a previous commitment, we need to find a way to deal with this. We cannot ignore. So, for example, ESDS, I think it's a crucial question, especially in Germany. I am sure that Chancellor Merkel will discuss this with President Obama. But I think that there is a way to sort out those kind of issues. The other one, the cultural one, are much more difficult. And the Parliament, if we try to, for example, make a deal to accept immediately GMO, for sure will jump in and create problems. Yeah. That's why I'm saying that we need to exclude those issues from the first deal, because otherwise we will keep on negotiating for years, waiting to reach an agreement on the chicken. And I don't want the chicken to stop the TTIP.
Well, I mean, I'm about to go to the last question, but just to say, there are, of course, those here who view that as all just a cynical cover for protection of European agricultural interests. You know, so
yeah. It might be.
That has to be seen.
Let me answer. It might be. I'm not judging. Right. I'm not an advocate against the chlorine chicken.
Right.
It's not what I'm doing here. I'm just saying that there are questions that are deeply rooted into our culture. Europe and US. Try to touch the Jones Act. Are you sure we're going to modify the Jones Act? I'm not sure. So there are things that are there to stay for a little bit longer. I don't agree. I would like to have I'm a free trader, but still we need to be pragmatical. Otherwise, we're going to have chicken stopping the Transatlantic Agreement, which is very sad. Yeah. For the chicken as well.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to belabor this. This gentleman will get the last question, but just I have a particular bee in my bonnet about GMOs, because it's not just stopping the transatlantic trade, it might be stopping nutrition for children
I do
in
agree.
Africa.
I do agree with you.
So, but anyway, please.
But it's an example.
Yeah, no, it's a fair example. Please.
A question for Jeffrey.
Sorry, who are you?
Riccardo Monti, the president of the Italian Trade Agency.
Thank you.
I have a question for Jeffrey. He has shown some very interesting impact analysis on the TTIP. And I was surprised to see that you project a positive impact on US export, which is almost 3 times as big as positive impact of European Union exports. This probably factors in that the US has a much stronger manufacturing competitive scenario and probably a very positive exchange rate. Can you expand a little bit on that? And the second part of the question is, for some reason, in the US, trade seems like a vote-losing issues. You know, I don't understand, with this figure, talking about hundreds of thousands of new jobs, why don't you make this voice heard out? Why people are still afraid of trade as an election topic for losing votes, where you could be an amazing opportunity? We're not Mexico, it's not NAFTA, it's a different story.
Well, first, we have to say the facts. NAFTA created jobs here, and please do not feed the lies of the people who say that NAFTA was bad for us, and that because that lie, yes, but they're wrong, and that lie, but don't repeat it. Seriously. That lie getting invoked is part of what erodes the congressional support for TTIP. So let's be careful. The trade deals that the U.S. made, even with Mexico, even with Colombia, even with Asia, with Korea, have been beneficial to the U.S. as a whole and have created jobs on net. Yeah, so please don't make that mistake. Thank you.
Well, further to that, the agreements have all been very beneficial, but not to everybody. And unlike Europe, our social safety net is not as good as it should be. And so this leads to politicians playing off the adjustment that occurs. But that said, a trade agreement, given the size of the US economy, the churning in the labor markets that come from a trade agreement are tiny compared to the churning that takes place every month in the US economy because of the creative destruction, because of the advances of technology. And we are benefiting from that all the time. And indeed, when Gary Huffbauer and I did our initial studies of NAFTA 20 years ago, we showed a very small net employment impact. The politicians totally exaggerated it, even though we said this is in the area of statistical noise. It didn't make any difference in the overall level of employment. But what was important was that we were moving to better jobs, better paying jobs that would be more stable and secure. That's what the trade agreements are doing. They're improving the composition of employment. and helping companies become more efficient and therefore more productive so that they can invest more, the economy grows, and when the economy grows, then we can employ more people. And that's how the overall growth in the economy leads to an improvement in employment. That's, I think, what we're trying to do with TTIP. Now, the studies that were shown were not from our institute. We have to do a rigorous job. But early on, I think because of the interest in Europe over the last 3 or 4 years, there were a number of studies that were conducted that ran into great difficulties in trying to estimate what would the impact be if you have some reforms on services. How do you assess the impact of a regulatory reform? Does it reduce transaction costs by 10 or 20%? Emma mentioned that in her comments. That would be very, very significant. But it differs.
See, we're all in this together.
I try to be polite, but
Because the assumption, I think, because the assumption is that if you reduce all the tariff, this is a little bit an advantage for US.
Yes.
Right.
And the assumption was that only 50% of the regulatory issues that are more beneficial for, and the market taxes that are more beneficial for Europe were cancelled. So it's a little bit unbalanced toward tariff, and therefore more beneficial for US. I think. I'm not just guessing.
No, let me, Jeff articulated it very well, but let me add 2 quick points. First is, these kinds of models, they are always long-term models, and they don't depend on the exchange rate. So don't assume that this is, that doesn't mean the exchange rate doesn't matter, but when we're talking about projecting these long-term gains, inherently, because of the technique you use, you have to assume the exchange rate, this isn't going to matter for more than a year or 2. This is about the long-term adjustment. The second thing is, I would hope, however the models come out, and I agree with Jeff, it's up to us now to take it on and try and do the next generation of estimating what the impact would be. But I would hope that whatever the models came out, if it did continue to turn out that the U.S. gained as much in 3 times as much in exports as Europe, or vice versa, people would still back it. That we don't need for political purposes to make sure that the gains are equal on each side, wherever as long as there are gains. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. We have come to a little later than we expected, but it's been a very rich discussion. I'm going to call a luncheon and networking break. We invite all of you to go. Please eat as much GMO chlorinated food as possible at the back of the room. For our friends viewing on the internet, we will reconvene at 12:45 for our expert panel with Carolyn Freund of the Institute, Daniel Kraus of Confindustria, Marjorie Shorlins of the U.S. Chamber, and Shane Kerr from the Association of Automobile Manufacturers. Thank you. We